Hello guys and welcome. Let's start by saying that we all love vampires. As you know, the books and the movies, they all made us believe that the vampires are sexy, rich, strong, romantic. But the thing is, the real truth about vampires is completely different. I have few well-documented cases of real Balkan vampires and I hope you will enjoy the stories. Yura Grand was a villager from Kringa, the region of Istria in modern-day Croatia, who may have been the first real person described as a vampire in historical records. He died in 1656 due to illness, but according to legend, returned from the grave at night as a vampire and terrorized his village until his decapitation in 1672. The legend tells that for 16 years after his death, Yura would arise from his grave by night and terrorize the village. The village priest, Giorgio, who had buried Yura 16 years previously, discovered that at night somebody would knock on the doors around the village, and on whichever door he knocked, someone from that house would die within the next few days. Yura also appeared to his terrified widow in her bedroom, who described the corpse as looking as though he was smiling and gasping for breath, and then he would sexually assault her. When Father Giorgio eventually came face to face with the vampire, he held out a cross in front of him and yelled, "Behold Jesus Christ, you vampire, stop tormenting us." The bravest of villagers chased and tried to kill the vampire by piercing his heart with a stick, but failed because the stick would just bounce off of his chest. One night later, 9 people went to the graveyard, carrying a cross, lamp and a stick. They dug up Yura's coffin and found a perfectly preserved corpse with a smile on his face. Father Giorgio said, "Look, vampire, there is Jesus Christ who saved us from hell and died for us. And you, vampire, you cannot have peace." They then tried to pierce its heart again, but the stick could not penetrate its flesh. After some exorcism prayers, one of the villagers took a saw and sawed the head of the corpse. As soon as the saw tore his skin, the vampire screamed and blood started to flow from the cut. According to tales, peace finally returned to the regions after Yura's decapitation. Sava Savanović is one of the most famous vampires in Serbian folklore. Sava Savanović was said to have lived in an old watermill on the Rogačica river at Zarožje village. It was said that he killed and drank the blood of the millers when they came to mill their grains. Although he is usually said to have been the first Serbian vampire, there are claims that he was predated in Serbian folklore by Petar Blagojević, who died in 1725. Blagojević and the affair surrounding him came to European attention at the time under the name Petar Plogojević and represented one of the earliest examples of vampire hysteria. Still, Sava Savanović remains today as the best-known vampire in Serbia. Arnaut Pablo was a Serbian hajduk who was believed to have become a vampire after his dad initiating an epidemic of supposed vampirism that killed at least 16 people in his native village of Medveđa, located at West Morava River in Trstenik, Serbia. Pavle's case became famous because of the direct involvement of the Austrian authorities and the documents by Austrian physicians and officers who confirmed the reality of vampires. Their report of the case was distributed in Western Europe and contributed to the spread of vampire belief among educated Europeans. According to the account of the Medveđa locals as it told there, Pavle was hajduk who had moved to the village from the Turkish-controlled part of Serbia. He reportedly often mentioned that he had been plagued by a vampire, but that he had cured himself by eating soil from the vampire's grave and smearing himself with his blood. About 1725 he broke his neck in a fall from a hay wagon. Within 20 or 30 days after Pavle's death, 4 people complained that they had been plagued by him. These people all died shortly thereafter. It was then remembered that Pavle has been tormented by a Turkish vampire. 10 days later and 40 days after Pavle's death, the villagers opened his grave. They saw that the corpse was undecomposed with all the indication of an arch-vampire. Concluding that Pablo was indeed a vampire, Villagers drove a stake through his heart, to which he reacted by frightful shriek, as if he were alive, groaning and bleeding. So villagers cut off his head and burned the whole body. They did the same to Pavle's 4 supposed victims, to prevent them from becoming vampires as well. About 5 years later, in the winter of 1731, a new epidemic occurred, with more than 10 people dying within several weeks, some of them in just 2 or 3 days without any previous illnesses. Report on the case stated that by 12 December, 13 people had died in the course of 6 weeks. According to other report, by the 7th of January, 17 people had died within a period of 3 months. The villagers complained of the new deaths to Schnetzer, the Austrian military commander in charge of the administration. The latter, fearing an epidemic of pestilence, sent for imperial infectious disease specialist military Dr. Glasser, who examined the villagers and their houses. He failed to find any signs of a contagious malady and blamed the deaths on the malnutrition common in the region. However, the villagers insisted that the illnesses were caused by vampires. At that moment, 2 or 3 households were gathering together at night, with some asleep and others on the watch. They were convinced that the deaths wouldn't stop unless the vampires were executed by the authorities, and threatened to abandon the village in order to save their lives if that wasn't done. Glasser consented to the exhumation of some of the deceased. To his surprise, he found that most of them were not decomposed, and many were swollen and had blood in their mouth. He outlined his findings in a report, recommending that the authorities should pacify the population by fulfilling its request to execute the vampires. On the 13th of February, Glasser's father, Austrian Dr. Johann Friedrich Glasser, who was also a correspondent to the Nuremberg Journal, sent its editors a letter describing the entire case as his son has written to him. The story aroused great interest. After that, reports and the letter were reprinted in a number of articles. They discovered at last, after much search, that Arnaut Pavle had killed not only 4 persons, but also several oxen, of which the new vampires has eaten. Upon these indications, they resolved to disinter all those who have died within a certain time. Amongst 40, 17 were found with all the most evident signs of vampirism. So they transfixed their hearts and cut off their heads also, then cast their ashes into the river. All the information and executions just mentioned were made in proper form and attested by several officers. Petar Blagojević was a Serbian peasant who was believed to have become a vampire after his death, and to have killed 9 of his fellow villagers. The case was one of the earliest, most sensational and most well-documented cases of vampire hysteria. It was described in the report of Imperial Provisor Frombald, an official of the Austrian administration, who witnessed the staking of Blagojević. Blagojević lived in the village named Kisilova. He died in 1725, and his death was followed by a spate of other sudden deaths. Within 9 days, 9 people perished. On their deathbeds, the victims allegedly claimed to have been throttled by Blagojević at night. Furthermore, Blagojević's wife stated that he had visited her and asked her for his shoes. She then moved to another village for safety reasons. In other legend, it is said that Blagojević came back to his house demanding food from his son, and when the son refused, Blagojević brutally murdered him, probably by biting and drinking his blood. The villagers decided to disinter the body and examine it for signs of vampirism, such as growing hair, beard and nails, and the absence of decomposition. The inhabitants of Kisilova demanded that Frombald, along with the local priest, should be present at the procedure as a representative of the administration. Frombald tried to convince them to permission from the Austrian authorities in Belgrade should be sought first. The locals declined it because they feared that by the time the permission came, the whole community could be exterminated by the vampire, which they claimed had already happened in Turkish time. Together with the priest, he viewed the already exhumed body and was astonished to find that characteristics associated with vampires in local belief were indeed present. The body was undecomposed, the hair and beard were grown. After that, the people, who grew more outraged than distressed, proceed to stake the body through the heart, which caused a great amount of completely fresh blood to flow through the ears and the mouth of the corpse. Finally, the body was burned. Fornwald concludes his report on the case with a request that, in case these actions were found to be wrong, he should not be blamed for them, as the villagers were beside themselves with fear. The authorities apparently did not consider it necessary to take any measures regarding the incident. The report on this event was among the first documented testimonies about vampire beliefs in Eastern Europe. It was published in Austrian newspaper, along with a report of the very similar Arnold Paul case from 1726. It was widely translated west and north, contributing to the vampire craze of the 18th century in Germany, France and England. Thank you guys for visiting my channel. Please feel free to send me your own scary stories, stories somebody else told you, or some interesting legends from your countries. My email is in the description box, and since you are already here, please subscribe, leave a comment and hit the like button. Stay safe and I'll see you soon.